Hello and welcome to Occupied Thoughts, a podcast brought to you by the Foundation for Middle East Peace. I'm Sarah Ann Minkin, Director of Programs and Partnerships for the Foundation. Today is August 16th, 2022, and I am delighted to be here with Jehad Abusalim. Jehad is the Education and Policy Coordinator of the Palestine Activism Program at the American Friends Service Committee, AFSC, and he's also a non-resident fellow at FMEP. He's completing his PhD in the History and Hebrew and Judaic Studies Joint Program at New York University. Jehad's research focuses on Arab and Palestinian intellectual discourse, on Zionism, antisemitism, and the plight of the Jewish people in Europe between 1870 and 1948. And you can listen to a conversation that Jehad and I had about his research a few months ago in another episode of Occupied Thoughts. Jehad also studies the social and political history of the Gaza Strip, focusing on the continuing impact of the Nakba on life in Gaza before and after 1948. His most recent publication is an anthology that he co-edited, released just yesterday by Haymarket Books, entitled Light in Gaza, Writings Born of Fire. You can find a link to that anthology and many other resources we're going to mention in this podcast on the FMEP website, fmep.org. Jehad grew up in Gaza and left about 10 years ago to continue his education in the United States. I wanted to talk to him in the aftermath of Israel's most recent aerial assault on Gaza, 3 days of bombardment from August 5th through August 8th. We're going to talk about the question of how to talk about Gaza. What are the right frameworks that can help us understand Gaza itself, and also what Gaza means and how Gaza fits into visions for freedom, for justice, for human and civil rights for all the inhabitants between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea. Jehad, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
So before we launch into bigger political questions, let's talk about this most recent assault. Israel said that it launched the attack in order to stop what they called an imminent attack planned by the Gaza-based group, Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Israel said it targeted people associated with Islamic Jihad. During the 3 days of bombardment, which sparked retaliatory rockets fired by Islamic Jihad, 49 Palestinians in Gaza were killed, including 17 children. Israel has launched aerial wars and campaigns on Gaza for years. In 2008-9, 2012, 2014, last year, May of 2021, and again now, just a week ago, 2 weeks ago. Will you talk to us, please, about this most recent assault? What is the same and what's different between this assault and the last ones? What do we need to know about this most recent campaign in order to understand what's happening in Gaza?
Thanks for this question, Sarah Ann, and again, thanks for having me on the podcast. Israel's brutal 3-day bombardment of the Gaza Strip was part of its policy towards the Gaza Strip and part of thank you so much for this question, Sarah, and again, thank you so much for having me on the podcast. Israel's most recent aggression against the Gaza Strip and against the Palestinian people who live there was a continuation of the policy known as mowing the lawn, according to the words of Israeli security and military leaders. We heard this term a lot, and it was part of Israel's ever continuing colonial violence against Palestinians. I can talk about the immediate context. I can talk about the lead up to the aggression, but it is very important to view this moment as part of the broader context of daily violence, of occupation, of land seizure, of the Israel's continuation to assault Palestinian freedom and self-determination between the river and the sea. So it is very important to establish that at the beginning. Now, in terms of the lead up to this most recent aggression, it all began when Israeli forces conducted a spectacular act of arrest in daylight of a Palestinian leader who is affiliated with the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement in the West Bank. They did it in broad daylight. They took large military force, and the intention was to provoke a response from the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Following this operation in the West Bank, just a few days before the attack on Gaza, Israel announced that they're taking preemptive measures in the area they call in Hebrew Atif Azza, or in English translates into the Gaza cover, which refers to areas that are adjacent to the Gaza Strip but are under Israeli control, and where Israeli settlements were established after 1948, and of course in Palestinian cities that were conquered in 1948, such as Asqalan, Usdud, Al-Majdal, and other Palestinian towns. So they announced emergency measures. They opened the shelters. They for some reason they were preparing the Israeli population there for an escalation. In the meantime, Palestinians in Gaza were not expecting an explosion, an eruption of Israeli attacks on the Gaza Strip. In fact, this summer witnessed, perhaps, I don't have numbers, but probably witnessed the highest number of visits by Palestinians from Gaza who live abroad, due to certain changes that took place at the Rafah crossing south of Gaza. So a lot of families were visiting their relatives, probably for the first time in a decade or so. People were thinking about the economic situation, barely recovering from the brutal attack in May 2021, which was devastating for Palestinians in Gaza. So Israel conducts this arrest campaign in the West Bank, and then and creates these emergency conditions in the Gaza cover region, and then starts cutting the electricity and fuel supply to the Gaza Strip, which, Gaza is a very hot and humid place in the summer. So cutting fuel supplies needed for electricity generation, or cutting the electric supply to Gaza is something that is incredibly violent, because it worsens the situation there, which is already bad. Gaza has a serious, severe electricity and power shortage crisis. And the Israeli military was just waiting for the Islamic Jihad to respond. They were talking about, the Islamic Jihad responding, but the Islamic Jihad did not respond. The Islamic Jihad did not launch any rockets into Israel as a response to that very immediate, to these immediate acts that Israel committed, whether in the West Bank or around Gaza. And when the Islamic Jihad did not respond, Israel just launched the attack, without provocation, without any pretext, just because they felt that it was the right time for them to conduct that operation, and because they wanted to achieve certain strategic and tactical objectives that I can talk about. So yeah, that's the general context around this aggression. It was different. So it's similar to some of the previous moments of when Israel attacked Gaza in some ways, and it's different than some of them. So for example, it's similar to the 2008-2009 attack in the sense that it was a surprise attack. People did not anticipate it, people did not see it coming, and there was no, yes, I mean, there was like ceasefire, the ceasefire ended between Israel and Gaza in 2008, and between Israel and the resistance groups in Gaza, and of course, but nobody expected a military operation in that scale that we witnessed in 2008. And I was in Gaza in 2008. I vividly remember every single moment of that attack. It was pretty brutal, unprecedented in its scale and the scale of death and destruction, and it took Palestinians in Gaza by surprise. I can talk about what it was like to experience that later. Now in 2014 and in 2014 and in 2021, there were contexts within the broader situation in historic Palestine. In 2014, there wasn't, the killing of Muhammad Abu Khdair by the settlers who killed him and set him on fire, which was followed by an uprising in the West Bank and parts of Palestine, which led to a series of events that culminated in the attack on Gaza in 2014. In May 2021, things started in Sheikh Jarrah, and then we all saw the Israeli attacks on the worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque. There was a sense of public mobilization in the Palestinian street, and a growing sense of solidarity that transcended Israel's walls and fences. People united around, the advocating against Israel's policies, evicting Palestinians from their homes in broad daylight on live television and social media. These scenes were very triggering, were very offensive, attacking worshippers at Al-Aqsa Mosque. So there was this general, sense of unity, of different Palestinian communities are engaged in a battle against Israel in various forms, in various ways, and then eventually, it became, politically impossible for the groups in Gaza not to engage, and then we saw what happened after that. So like 2008, what happened this summer was similar to 2008 in the sense that it was like a surprise attack, but what was unique about this attack in this August was how brief the Israelis wanted to be. Israel wanted to achieve their strategic goals, target the military leadership of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and target one faction alone in isolation from the rest of the Palestinian factions, and achieve certain goals, but within a short period of time, where it's not enough for the Palestinian street to mobilize in order to generate like a national and a transnational response. It's not enough for the international public, like opinion to formulate an understanding, but also a response to what was happening. And also, and to basically, achieve what, the political and military leaders of Israel considered, strategic gains through this attack. So for the Israeli military, and of course, for the Israeli government, they wanted to erase the legacy of May 2021. May 2020.
Wait, say that part. They wanted to raise or
erase
the legacy
of May 2021.
What do you mean?
In May 2021, for the first time in a long time, Palestinians from all over historic Palestine united in their mobilization against Israel. We saw Palestinians in Gaza, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, even Palestinians in 48, all coming together in an organic from below movement and uprising that raised the slogan of unity, that was unified by this idea of rejecting the Israel's practice of ethnic cleansing in broad daylight, because this is the central question for Palestinians: national existence and the very physical safety and well-being of Palestinians as people, as families, as people who live in their homes. So in the lead up to what happened in 2021, Palestinians saw on live TV, on social media, these scenes of the Israeli state backing those settler organizations and working on expelling Palestinians from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah. And that was incredibly triggering for Palestinians, because it touches the core of why Palestinians, why there is a Palestine question to begin with. And then, Jerusalem came, and I talk about this in my article about the Great March of Return. Jerusalem, Al-Quds, and the refugee issue are very central to what defines the Palestinian struggle and plight for freedom and self-determination. So when these two factors are combined, and when Palestinians feel assaulted, Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa Mosque, they have, their, of course, religious significance and symbolic, importance. And of course, the refugee issue is the core issue of why Palestinians are still, fighting and engaging in this like decades-long struggle. So May 2021 represented an unprecedented, I wouldn't say unprecedented, but like an incredible moment of unity, and it created this collective sense of like solidarity, and it showed Israel what Palestinians can achieve when they rise up in uprising, and when in defiance of Israel's walls and fences and its sophisticated efforts to create physical, intellectual, and political fragmentation in historic Palestine. So after the ceasefire was signed in May 2021, the Israeli military and political leadership was faced with a challenge. Palestinians, it's true that Palestinians lost a lot of people were killed, a lot of homes were destroyed, and but Palestinians came out of that moment, with there was a collective sense of triumph, even if it was symbolic, and that I think that represented a huge issue for Israel and for the Israeli political and military leadership, especially for someone like Aviv Kochavi, who tested a lot of theories and a lot of tactics during the assault on Gaza in May 2021 that proved to have failed in even achieving specific military goals for Israel. So, and then we, of course, everybody talked about the elections, the upcoming elections as context for this most recent operation.
The upcoming Israeli elections.
The upcoming, Yair Lapid wanting to create this image that he's a strong man, and assert himself as someone who's capable of, launching military attacks and killing Palestinians. So I think all these factors combined can help us understand what happened. But again, within the broader context of decades of this,
right?
This is just another, moment of Israeli violence against Palestinians, which still continues even after the ceasefire was signed.
Thank you for all of that. I actually want to ask you just to go back to this one piece on erasing May 2021. So if May 2021 was about Palestinian unity, so erasing that with this assault, what does that mean? And how does that, you didn't actually speak explicitly about Hamas's role just now in this most recent escalation. So will you talk about those two things, about what the decisions Hamas made around this most recent Israel's campaign and Islamic Jihad in Gaza, and then also the question of unity and Israel wanting to address this or neutralize this kind of unity?
Yeah, I think from the beginning, we heard reports coming out of the Israeli press talking about how this operation aimed at creating a wedge between Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. And I personally, I can't tell what were the considerations that the leadership of Hamas or the Islamic Jihad, they had in mind during that attack, after and before. But my personal assessment is that the decision by Hamas not to participate in this attack has to do with strategic and tactical factors. On one hand, it was a surprise attack, so Hamas is not just a resistance group in the Gaza Strip and in the rest of Palestine where it has presence. In the Gaza Strip, Hamas is also a government. It's responsible for the public administration, vital institutions that touch on people's survival and daily lives, and so on and so forth. I think, and I might be wrong, but that's my personal assessment. If Hamas chose to get the Hamas's calculation for not getting involved in this round was to spare Gaza the immense scale of destruction that would have befell the Gaza Strip if Hamas joined. And what does that mean? We saw that in May 2021. We saw how Israel was targeting these large residential buildings that house dozens of families. And we saw how Israel targeted factories, vital infrastructure, streets, hospitals, clinics, and so on and so forth. So I think Hamas' calculation was that, they're looking at the Palestinian, street in Gaza. They're looking at what people, how people are struggling with the difficult economic situation this summer, and they know that people haven't recovered from like last year's attack yet, and for them, they made an active decision not to engage in this operation, to also make sure that they don't give Israel the justification to expand the scale of the destruction and the scale of bombardment, and to, at the same time, it is not possible for any, group operating from the Gaza Strip to engage in that level of combat against Israel without some sort of consensus amongst the active resistance groups there. So this is my personal assessment. It's really difficult to tell, but I also think that there was the Palestinian factions wanted to respond, but at the same time they also didn't want for this attack to last longer than it did, because at the end of the day, like I said, economy is in a bad situation. People still haven't recovered from May 2021. Reconstruction hasn't even started yet, or maybe it did, but in a slow pace. So, avoiding further bloodshed, I think that was the central factor here.
Great, thank you for that, and for giving us this particular vision and window into what life in Gaza is like. And I actually want to ask you a little bit more about that in particular. You wrote in the past, you tweeted, and I'm gonna quote: "The mere existence of the Gaza Strip in its current shape is a violent crime. To trap 2.2 million people in a small strip of land with one of the world's highest population densities for demographic reasons, such a brutal, sadistic, and inhumane reality." That's what you tweeted. And Gaza is about 140 square miles, about the same size as Philadelphia or Detroit. And for the past 15 years, Israel has imposed a strict blockade, as you know, restricting trade and travel and everyday life. What do you want this audience that's listening now, what do you want them to know about life in Gaza outside of the periodic aerial bombardments, about how people live and survive there?
The Gaza Strip is a crowded place. It's one of the areas with the highest population densities in the world. The current population density rate is around 13,000 human beings per 1 square mile. And people talk about, when I tweeted that, I received a lot of backlash from people who were saying, if you look at any crowded city around the world, you will find even higher population densities than in the Gaza Strip. But what people don't realize is that the Gaza Strip is physically isolated from the rest of Palestine with a fence that recently became a wall. And usually urban centers with high population densities are connected to a suburban / rural context where with economic, social, and political and institutional links. The Gaza Strip is an isolated enclave. It's not linked even to the, if we think about the logic of the two-state solution that takes for granted that a future Palestinian state will be established on what is today the Gaza Strip and the West Bank. The Gaza Strip doesn't even have a geographic link with the West Bank. So when thinking about Gaza today and its future and its present, the question of overcrowdedness is a pressing one. You have this large number of people who live in this very small territory with very few resources to offer that can guarantee their physical well-being and their survival, especially in an immediate future where climate change is a major concern, water shortage is a major concern, energy shortage is something that Palestinians in Gaza have experienced and know, but like things will continue to deteriorate as the climate change worsens and so on and so forth. So this is like a brief description of the current reality. But how did we get there? What made the Gaza Strip this small, isolated enclave that is cut off from the rest of historic Palestine, and what kind of process led to the creation of this entity today we call the Gaza Strip? Well, the Gaza Strip, in its current shape and form, was a product of a man-made situation. In 1948, when the State of Israel was established on 78% of historic Palestine, it pushed a lot of Palestinian communities from their cities, towns, and villages, expelled them, and those Palestinians either ended up in neighboring Arab states or in parts of Palestine. Those Palestinians who lived within the boundaries of the pre-1948 Gaza district, which was one of Mandate Palestine's largest districts geographically. Those Palestinians were pushed to the southwest towards Gaza, and they sought refuge there. They were turned into refugees there, and their homes, towns, villages, and cities that are adjacent to what is today the Gaza Strip were taken by Israel. Not only in 1948, Palestinians from the city of Al-Majdal, they stayed in their homes in 1948, and it wasn't until 1949, 1950 that Israel actually put them on buses and expelled them, to Gaza. So the Gaza Strip was basically a strip of land, the only chunk of land, of Palestinian land, that survived Israel's conquest in 1948. And when Palestinians were confined into this new territory, the idea was that they were seeking refuge there. We're talking about 70% of the population of the Gaza Strip have been and are refugees from these towns and villages, and that once the war is over, people will go home, because for Palestinians, the experience of seeking refuge in neighboring towns and villages, when armies pass through Palestine, or when Palestine is like the field for battle or warfare between empires and like conquering forces, that wasn't something new. In World War I, the entire population of Gaza City sought refuge in neighboring Palestinian villages and towns, because the Gaza City was a stage for very violent fighting between the invading British forces and the Ottoman forces that were stationed there. After the war, even though the city was destroyed, everybody returned home. So this wasn't something unprecedented. So you have in 1948 200,000 Palestinians from areas around what is today Gaza sought refuge in what's become the Gaza Strip, in addition to 100,000 Palestinians who were already within that region. And after 1948, a fence was put, and people were told there's no going home. So now when I talked about the population density in Gaza, right across the fence from the Gaza Strip, and I urge the listeners to open Google Maps and just have a bird's view look on Gaza. Right across the fence from the Gaza Strip, the population density is from 0 to 500 per 1 square mile. So, you know, people, 70% of the population of Gaza are refugees, and those people can see their towns and villages from the refugee camps. Palestinians from al-Majdal can see their city. So this context is very important. This context is very important. You know, people are being trapped in this area just because of who they are, just because Israel wants to maintain its, you know, Jewish majority, you know, demographic considerations. So I think this context is very important when understanding Gaza, and you know, and I really urge people to, you know, reflect about this and think about the consequences of what happened in 1948 and its continuation into like today and how it affects the present reality. Great,
thank you. I mean, thank you for that, for being for giving us such a rich and layered response and picture of Gaza. And you have written, and we'll have links up on the website about this imperative of addressing the Nakba when trying to understand present day Gaza and the importance of it for envisioning a different future. And so we will have links to your writing up on the website so people can read more. I want to ask you, now we're in 10 days, almost 10 days since the latest campaign. What are the lessons to be learned from the realities and the violence in Gaza for Palestine more broadly? So how do you think about Gaza within the framework of Palestinian liberation overall? And I'm asking you, Jihad, how you think about Gaza within the framework of Palestinian liberation overall. And you just talked a little bit about the Nakba, so I want to ask you to expand about that. But I also want to ask you to talk to us about how you want other people, whether other Palestinians or international diplomats or human rights activists, human rights advocates or activists, to think and to talk about Gaza.
Thank you for this important question. I think since 1948, you know, I always argue that the Gaza Strip in its current shape and form was the creation of the Nakba. Therefore, the logical thing for people there, who are reminded every day of how the Nakba created their misery, their concern is to undo the Nakba, to end the Nakba and its continuation. And in that sense, you know, Palestinians in Gaza and elsewhere, of course, but you know, I'm talking specifically here about the Palestinian experience in Gaza. The fact that they were confined in this very limited space and reminded of the massive loss of land in 1948 has been a motivating, the main motivating force behind their understanding of the nature of the clash with Zionism and their struggle against Israel as a settler colonial project. So since 1948, Palestinians in Gaza have engaged in a series of struggles to emphasize that there can never be peace or a just resolution or any form of resolution for, you know, the Palestine question without the right of return and the implementation of the right of return, and without addressing the injustices that were created in 1948. And this is the reality that, you know, the international community doesn't want to consider. That's the reality that a lot of people who work in, you know, on Palestine, Israel, and the diplomatic levels don't want to consider. And this is the reality that, you know, even Palestinian, you know, entities such as the Palestinian Authority and who are like, you know, linked to the international community consensus on how to address what they view as a conflict and have a recipe for its resolution. You know, they adopt this discourse that, you know, it's enough to address 1967. There is no need to go back to 1948, and they take what happened in 1948 for granted, as if, you know, it was people became concentrated in Gaza as refugees because, you know, of like normal push and pull factors. You know, people were just, you know, in the hundreds of thousands decided to just end up in Gaza and live in 8 refugee camps in miserable conditions. That's why in the 1950s, when there were schemes and plans to, you know, eliminate the Palestinian refugee question, and you know, when certain forces within the international community were considering resettlement plans for Palestinian refugees, the Gaza Strip, you know, rejected these efforts and emphasized that, you know, the right of return as a sacred Palestinian right, and as a sacred Palestinian notion that is not open for negotiations. And that sentiment continued and continues until the present day. Every day when you wake up in Gaza and look to the east and see the fence that is separating you from your village and town, you know, which is within like walking distance from where you are in Gaza in a refugee camp, and look to the west and, you know, see the Mediterranean Sea, and, you know, you're reminded of how confined you are. You're reminded that you are confined in this limited space, in this limited geographic area, with limited resources for political and demographic reasons. And that inspires people to you know, approach the way they think about their future, the way they think about their struggle, the way they think about the roads that need to be taken in ways that are clear and visible and are not blurred. And it's time to hear people out. It's time to consider what the message coming out of Gaza is. In 2018, when Palestinians in Gaza, you know, organized the protests near the fence during a time when the blockade was, you know, reached unbearable levels, they did not call their protests the Great March to end the blockade. They called it the Great March of Return, because they know that the blockade is just a symptom, is just another, you know, symptom of the continuation of that reality that was created in 1948. When the terms were set and the international community normalized those terms, that Palestinians should linger as refugees, should be forgotten, should be treated as, you know, subhuman species, deprived of their rights, deprived of their, you know, dignity, in order for a modern nation state project to thrive and continue. And Palestinians in Gaza say no to this. And I think there is something honorable about them saying no to this, because no one wants to live in a world where demographic realities are imposed, you know, through the barrel of the gun, and you know, and you know, the answer to situations like Gaza is always violence and or, you know, like dehumanization of people who live there. So I think there's something very important that Gaza can offer us today, in terms of, you know, thinking about how a group of people were deprived of their rights and dignity, and how the world normalized that, and how it's a dangerous precedent. And the fact that people in Gaza say no and resist that is a very honorable thing that needs to be celebrated and not smeared and dehumanized.
Thank you for all of that. I want to ask you one last question. again, about people in Gaza, but about specific people in Gaza. So in May of 2021, you published a piece in the Washington Post about Gaza, about that assault, about the ceasefire. And you wrote then, you tweeted, and you've actually pinned. I recommend everyone listening follow your Twitter feed, which is really, really informative and thought-provoking and valuable. But you pinned this tweet on which you wrote that that you had written this essay in the Washington Post for your sister, and you wrote, and now I'm quoting again, your sister who witnessed 4 wars in the last 10 years and who survived. So your sister is still in Gaza. The rest of your family is still in Gaza. How are they? What have been the effects on them after these many years of war, 10 of which you've watched from a distance? And you've now spoken a lot about this vision of what justice would look like for people in Gaza. What would it look like for your family?
My family comes from a city that is actually within the boundaries of what is today the Gaza Strip. It's called Deir al-Balah, Arabic for the monastery of date palms or dates. It's it used to be a small village famous for producing dates and wheat and barley, and it's also like a coastal town, so people, it's also famous for seafood, and for them, thinking about the family, like the family's history, and we're people who are very connected to the land, and my father, for him, seeing Gaza in its current reality today as this crowded space, filled with concrete wherever you look, for him, it's something that really disturbs him, and because he grew up and saw that the radical transformation of this space as a result of what happened in 1948, and how Gaza has become this like confined place where people are just forced to live under these conditions. So for them, their continuation of these attacks cannot be separated from the reality that they experience, because during the times of war or during these aggressions, things can be clear. You're being bombed, your turn might be next, or you might survive. It's a 50-50 chance. And in Gaza, it's more than 50-50 chance, because the odds are always higher that if your neighborhood is bombed, something bad might happen to you. But then, the real pain begins after, the ceasefire is signed, because, spectacular violence ends, but the daily violence of the violence of daily life in Gaza continues. With every aspect of their lives is a struggle. Electricity is a struggle. Power is a struggle. Water is a struggle. Securing food is a struggle. There's no, securing jobs for the young ones who finish college is a struggle. The inability of parents to plan the future of their kids, the inability of of people to think about the future in the short and on the short and long term. So I think, my family, they consider themselves, from the lucky ones because they have their home and they have their, small business, and they try to survive. But of course, what's really like tragic is I have a sibling who has like who has a disability, and for him, like those times of bombardment and explosions can be very scary. So it's very difficult for my parents, to create this sense of like, safety while you have, these explosions outside of your house. So it's, I don't know. I really don't know how to answer this question. How are they? They have survived, but to be honest, this immense violence that has been put on people in Gaza has left them deeply wounded from the inside. I mean, people are traumatized and they get re-traumatized over and over again. And then, like life just continues to be, difficult and gets worse. So on one hand, I look at my siblings and I celebrate that they learn and they, go to school and they try to work, and they always try to find hope in a very hopeless situation. And at the same time, it's a shame that, that someone like my sister, who's going to be 22 this year, had to experience the cast-led attack in 2008 when she was 8 years old, and the 2012 attack when she was 12 years old, the 2014 when she was 14 years old, the 2021 when she was 21 years old, and now just recently this year, she's 22 and about to be 22, and then she witnesses that too. And she posted on Instagram the day of the attack. She was at her work, Gaza City. They were having an office party and they were taking all these nice pictures. And then 30 minutes later, she's just like rushing to go home, fearing for her life. So like, it is about time for my sister to stop counting her, the years of her life and associating them with wars and with, these bloody aggressions. Palestinians in Gaza need to heal, they need to be heard, and they need to be free. And I think, and if the world is unable to honor that, then we're in deep trouble because we will end up with many Gazas around the world. And perhaps the entire world will become a big Gaza, where the poor and the unlucky are being punished and being violently suppressed, so that the very few can continue to enjoy their privileges and luxuries. But even that world, it's not sustainable.
Jehad, thank you so much. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Thank you for sharing your experiences, for talking about your family, for sharing your analysis. Thank you for all of this. I'm so grateful. And I want to thank also our listeners for tuning in to this episode of Occupied Thoughts. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your time. And please make sure to check out the FMEP website, www.fmep.org, for resources related to this podcast, for the many links that we talked about posting, and also for lots of other rich content related to Palestine and to Israel. And please make sure that you're subscribed to this podcast so you stay up to date. You can find us on iTunes, on SoundCloud, and on Spotify. And you can also watch video versions of our podcasts, including this one, on YouTube. And with that, I am Sarah Ann Minkin, signing off until the next episode of FMEP's Occupied Thoughts. Thank you so much and take good care.